Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell and welcome to another CIQ demo. So I'm going to be showing you how to use automation to migrate your VMware VMs straight over to Proxmox, right? It's going to pull them out of that and then stick them into the other without any intervention on your part. So this is something I have been fighting with for a little while, gone through a lot of different disparate things online, trying to piece all this together, and I'm going to make the easy button for you so that you don't have to do all of that. So in my demo today, I'm going to be migrating a couple of Rocky Linux hosts. Oh, surprise, surprise. Why would I be doing Rocky? But you should be able to migrate any other host. Now, there are going to be some tweaks and tunes you're probably going to have to do for those other VMs, those other OSs, but this should be a good starting point for you. So I'm going to start with Ascender. I'm going to fire off the automation. We'll kind of watch it move. And then I will then break down all of those little nuisances that took me a little while to figure out. So start at the start here. I'm in my template section. So I have created a couple of playbooks that this is actually going to be pulling in right here. They are the pre-configure and migrate VMs, and I have put them together in a workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that workflow right here by clicking the little rocket ship. As you can see, it pops into the job section, but the viewer for the workflow. A workflow allows you to take individual automations and kind of string them together visually. And so this one is super simple. I don't have any error recovery in a real environment. You actually would. So I could, if this pre-prep stuff were to fail, I could follow a red line and then do some error recovery, maybe try and repair or rerun or anything like that, maybe send a notification. In this instance, I am just doing the prep work. And so it's going to prepare those Linux operating systems first, then it's going to move on to the migration section. All right, so it has completed that prep work. Now it's moving over to the actual migration section. So let's pop into my VMware server. I'm going to be migrating this Rocky 9 and Rocky 9.2 host right here. You can see that they are currently offline. That's because after it preps the system. So essentially what it does is it connects into my Rocky 9 systems, and it's issuing a Draycut command, which will set up the init RAM file system with the virt.io drivers. So if you don't do that, whenever you try and boot it up later, it's not actually going to be able to detect the drives and you're going to have a bad time. So it does all of that and then it shuts them down. And we'll walk through that a little bit more in the playbook section. But for now, shut them down and then it's going to do the OVF migration process. You can see right down here, it says export OVF template. It's competing. You see both of these racing to finish, and through the magic of editing, you don't have to wait. We'll come right back. All right, the two have just completed. You can see down there. So now I'm going to move over to my Proxmox server, and we should momentarily see them starting to pop in. All right, you already see one popping in, 101, Greg Rocky 9-2. So after it runs the OVF tool, it's going to pull from VMware, and it's going to put those in a temporary folder. And then from there, it's going to take those and then issue the QM command to import all those inside of Proxmox. You can see them kind of popping in 1 and 2, but there is some post-processing that is required after that. Well, actually, otherwise it's just absolutely not going to work. The post-processing has to set up a few very specific things in hardware. After it does all of that, it's going to then boot the systems up. And so we should see that move through in just a moment. All right, they have completed provisioning. Now it should be doing the update on the individual configuration. So it has to do stuff like set the BIOS. So for me, in my Proxmox, it defaults to CBIOS. We had to change it to EFI, and then we had to create the EFI drive. Then we had to set the processor type, and then we also had to, what was the last thing? Oh yes, set up a network interface. And so it should be up and operating. Let's see, pop into the console here. This was the first one. It is still currently loading, but it should be completed just a moment. There we are. It is up. Root. Log into the box really quick. Let me ping the Google. And there you have it. It's up and on the network and it's accessible. So as you can see, that process went fairly smoothly. So if you want to go further down the rabbit hole, stick with me here and we will take a look at some of the playbooks that actually made all of that happen. Quick commercial break. So here at CIQ, we absolutely love helping customers build their automation environment as well as their automation practice. We have also become experts in migrating from one flavor of enterprise Linux over to another. I think you know which one is going to be my preferred for you to move to. So if you need help with enterprise Linux or migrations or automation, please give us a holler. Plus, Jimmy's getting bored and he tends to get really annoying when that happens. So I genuinely need your help to keep him busy. So drop us an email. All right. So taking a look at my Git repository here, I'll go into the base. You can see I really have 3 files. One is going to do the pre-configure work. So let's pop in and see what it's doing. And it's ultimately issuing 2 commands, right? So it's doing 2 tasks here. It's the, I don't know how you say this word, Dr. A-cut, Dracut, whatever you want to say. I don't know how to properly say it, so I'm just going to make up something. We'll call it Dr. A-cut. You issue that command, and essentially what you're doing is you're adding the virt.io SCSI and the virt.io PCI to the init RAM file system, and it's going to be using the kernel name. So it's really just going to create that based on the kernel name, and it's going to assign it in the boot folder. So that way, on boot, it'll actually have those up and available to you. So by default in mine, I was using the, what is it? It is the, well, let's take a look at it really quick. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say edit settings. I'm going to take a look at the SCSI controller. It's the VMware Paravirtual. Now, when I tried just importing those directly and setting it to the VMware Paravirtual, it would never actually like properly boot. It would never see the drives. So I found that using virt.io inside of Proxmox here, I'll go to the hardware section on that exact same host. So doing the virt.io SCSI actually did make the drives available, and the system could see them. And also by default, again, I think I mentioned earlier, the BIOS that comes in is the C BIOS. And so we had to change all of that, but I'll show you that in just a second when we get there. Let's pop back into the playbook. So that's essentially what it's doing. It's prepping the machine. Now, if you are running a different flavor of Linux, or maybe you have some special drivers you need to put in there, feel free to put those in, right? So this is really easily modifiable. That's why I made it its own separate little playbook, so that it's kind of easy to modify just the pre-prep system for, you know, whatever host you're connecting to. And for this one, I would probably put a check. So I would connect into the system, see what flavor of OS it is. If it's Rocky 9 or Rocky 8, I would go ahead and issue this command. If it was something else, I would call maybe a different task file, right? So it gives you options. You could put it all in one. You could have individual task files. Entirely up to you. After it does issue that command and it's successful, it will go ahead and just shut down the machine. I'm just using the community.general.shutdown, so it'll go ahead and turn it off. And I do that because I'm using the OVF tool from VMware, who is kind enough to supply that. And I am going to be having a company blog post that will show you how to actually configure that. Really, I didn't, and I absolutely could have done it via automation, just to connect into the Proxmox, go ahead and use the OVF tool, like install it and do all that stuff. But really, you need to go straight to VMware to get the download. And so I didn't want to have an automated way to bypass any of that stuff. I want you to actually go there, grab the files that you require, and get them ready to go. Really, it's essentially you're grabbing a tar file, you extract it, you make the OVF tool executable, you're done. It just runs after that. You can also grab the bundle installer and install that if you want, but it's a super simple process. Again, it'll be documented in the blog post, so don't worry too much about that. So after we do the prep work, we actually go into the migrate VMs playbook. So that's what my workflow did. First it did the prep work, and then it does the migration section. So in here, I'm setting up, and I explained all of this good stuff, how this works right here with anchors, references, in the previous one I did on VMware control and Proxmox control. And so essentially it allows you to make a reference to a set of variables, and I'm going to be using these for the Proxmox sections. After that, I've got several variables I'm setting up. I like to put all of my variables up at the top of the variable section, even if I'm overriding it, just so I can have it up and available and I see all the things, and it's more or less a documentation piece for me. So it keeps it really simple. I do like to try and variabilize as many things that are going to change, right? Just to keep it simple for everybody else that's coming along following behind me here. But OVF tool, the path. So I am again just taking the archive, extracting it, and so I'm telling it this is exactly where the file is. So that I use that when I run the OVF tool command, setting up some info on the VMware hosts, setting what my data center is, the VMware directory, username, password. And so something I found interesting is whenever you are, and let me scroll down here so you can actually see it. Whenever you are going to be extracting VMs, there's this special kind of hidden path that it's going to follow. I know this looks a little bit crazy right here, but essentially it's username, password at the VMware host right here, right? And then the port you're going to be connecting to, / and then the name of the data center, right? So for me, it's MNS, it's in my test cluster. So it's capital MNS / VM. So if you're doing a VM, that / VM is always going to be in that path. In the blog post, I'm going to show you how you can actually just kind of browse these directories to find how everything follows. You don't necessarily have to do that. Just remember it's data center / VM / and then you just start following your directory structure. So for me, I had it in a folder named Greg / CIQ / and that's where my stuff was. So I went ahead and filled that out. But I digress. Let's come back to the tasks. Very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be running most of this stuff on the Proxmox host itself. Now you could have these operate differently. So what I'm doing is I'm actually connecting into the Proxmox host and I am pulling those into just a temporary folder on the Proxmox host. So that means, essentially that folder structure on there has to be big. A lot of people don't really do that, right? On their host, they don't have like a lot of extra storage just for the Proxmox OS. You could in this instance, and for me, it kept this demo really simple, but what you could really be doing is you could map, say, an NFS share on a server, then you could run the OVF tool command that just puts them all in an NF share or NFS share somewhere. And then on the Proxmox server, whenever you're running the QM to like import these OVFs that you've created, you're going to import them. You're just pulling them from the NFS share and then you're sticking them into whatever file system is required on there, right? So you don't necessarily have to store it all right there temporarily on your Proxmox host. I'm doing it in this example. You could super easily just be running this stuff off to a network share somewhere that you can then just re-access. So keep that in mind. So first thing I'm doing is I'm setting up my inventory. So my inventory, I'm dynamically pulling it from my vCenter. So my Proxmox host isn't going to be in there. So I'm injecting that so that it's in the inventory, because if it's something in the inventory and you want to access it, it usually makes sense to go ahead and stick it in the inventory. So the very first command or task, I should say, is using the add host module, which will stick it in the just in memory, in the inventory in memory. So I've got my Proxmox host in there. After that, I am creating a migration directory on the Proxmox host, temporary place to store the files. Then I'm checking in that folder, right? So this is doing it idempotently. If the folder already exists, it's not going to create it. If it doesn't exist, it will go ahead and create it. And then it's going to check in there and make sure that I haven't already done the export on this host. If I have, it's going to just stop and not do anything. It's just essentially going to skip it later on. So it's really just making a list of everything it's found in there. Next, I'm hitting a block. And the block, I'm doing it in a block because I'm putting one conditional that will, everything under there will adhere to, right? So instead of putting a when condition on each one of these tasks, which I could do, instead I'm just putting them in a big block. It's just a little bit more efficient to operate that way. And it also kind of groups them together logically, right? So you can kind of see it makes it a little bit simpler. So the very first command I'm running here is the OVF tool path. Rather OVF, the OVF command. And so it's using the toolpath, where it's actually located. I walked through it just a second ago, but it's going to be exporting that individual file. And you can see right here some shenanigans. So in my inventory, let me show you in my Ascender. I'll go into inventory. I'll look for my VMware to Proxmox migration. I'll pop in here. I'll take a look at the host section. You can see that it took, say, Greg Rocky 9 _ and then this unique ID, right? That way, if you have multiple machines that have the same ID, inside of VMware, it actually appends this little unique ID on there so that, they won't override. You'll actually be able to specifically know which one. Well, whenever I'm referencing everything, I don't want to do it by that exact giant unique ID. But if I take a look at this individual host under the variables that it pulls in, I can see, right, config. Actually, let me expand this. It makes it a little bit easier to find everything. I can see I've got config.name right here, this variable, Greg-Rocky9. So that nice name that I'm accustomed to seeing, it's right there. And so in my playbook here, I'm referencing host vars, inventory name, config.name. So I'm really just pulling that nice name. So whenever I do the export, I'm exporting that nice name, space, period, and that will pull the OVF and all of the files. Now I could also say the data portion of these drives are actually coming from an NFS share, and I just want to reference those. I can just export with the no disk command, and it won't export any of the disks. I can then import those into Proxmox. It will create them, and then I can map those additional drives, right? I can attach those network drives over. So I don't necessarily have to grab all the data, pull it. Like, I don't have to pull all the drives and then push them somewhere else. I can do the no disk and then map that as well, right? I don't have it shown here, but it would just be a quick, simple modification to this to add that additional functionality. So it's going to go and it's going to grab those for all the various hosts. The next thing you see it do is it's going to call the import OVF task file. Now I had to do it this way specifically because let me open this in a new tab, import OVF YML. What I'm doing is I'm using a command in here. It's this pvesh get cluster next ID. If you run that command on the command line, what it'll do is it'll tell you the next VID or unique ID that Proxmox has. If you take a look at Proxmox, you can see right here where it says 101 is Greg 9-2, 102 is Greg Rocky 9, right? So it's actually got a unique ID for each one of these hosts. So that's really how you're gonna have to reference it, and whenever you create one, you have to create it via that unique ID. So they have this convenient command that will show you, hey, here's the very next unique ID you can use. The only problem is when Ansible runs a task, so say for example it runs this task right here, if I just tried to run the unique ID, it's gonna by default start with five forks, right? So it's gonna run 5 hosts simultaneously. Well, they're all gonna issue that command and they're all gonna get back the exact same number because they're all processing simultaneously, right? So they'll all get back 101, for example. When it tries to create them, there's gonna be an overlap on that unique ID. So we can't do that, so which means we have to process them one at a time. So what I did is I said, hey, do a run once and then loop over play hosts. And so in memory, all the hosts that are available in this play come under the play hosts variable. So I can just kind of loop over them really easy like that. So I say run once, but loop over all the hosts and call this task file every time you do it. So one at a time, they're going to run this. So it does slow down processing a little bit, right? So instead of parallel processing a whole bunch of these at once, it's going to do them sequentially. But it means that I get to very conveniently use this next ID command. So it will pull the next ID, so it'll be 101, and then it runs the qm import command. So you can see right here, it's running the qm import with that next ID that we just got. It will say it's in the folder, config.name, right? And that's the nice name that we had from VMware. So it creates a folder and then it puts the OVF of that exact same name inside that folder, and then I am specifying the Proxmox storage variable that I've assigned in the main playbook, right? And that's just going to be what storage device in Proxmox am I actually saving this stuff on. So it's going to run through, process all of that, and then it will exit the loop, go back in, grab the next host, and it'll just keep running through this task file until it's completed for all the hosts we have available to us. Well, now that they're actually imported, we have to do some modification. So in here in the Proxmox KVM module, I'm essentially setting all of my settings. I'm going to do an update. So something I learned in here is that for me, it's going to brick if I don't have the CPU set properly, and I had to set it to x86 64 V2, and I added AES. Just the regular V2 sans AES works as well. The SCSI hardware, again, I had to set it to VirtIO SCSI for it to recognize the drives properly. The BIOS, I had to change it from the CBIOS to OVMF. Which, is like I think they call it UEFI in there as well. Well, for UEFI to work, you have to actually create a UEFI disk. You can see that down there. I set up the network interface as well right here. And then I set it to update, and I tried running that and it failed. And I tried all these various iterations. Maybe my network interface was wrong or something like that. Couldn't get it to work. And eventually I started reading through all the documentation and line by line, and somewhere it happened to, I think on the network interface, or maybe on the update command itself, on update true, it actually told me that, oh, there's a whole chunk of things that it won't actually allow you to update it on an existing machine for safety reasons, because you could theoretically brick the machine and lose data. And one of those was network interface, and another one was an EFI disk. It wouldn't let you create those. So I learned that if you do update unsafe true, it allows you to go ahead and create those. And guess what? Everything magically started working after that. So keep in mind that if you are doing this stuff, there is a risk of data loss as you're moving it over, because you're technically allowing yourself to manipulate drives here. So be careful. On this, when I have update unsafe true on, it allows you to do some funky stuff, but for us it was absolutely required, and most of these commands actually work just fine. It was just a couple in there that didn't. But essentially, once you set those things up, it will be able to boot properly, and then the very last task we do is start the VM. And very simply, we are just cranking through all the hosts and turning them on. So really, I think you could see that was pretty succinct. There wasn't a whole lot in there. I know it seems like a long time because I talked forever, but that's just so that you would understand what's going on in these various pieces. If you actually look at the time of completion on that job, we pulled data for 2 VMs. We extracted their OVFs. We then imported them. Let's go to the job section. So how long did it take that workflow to actually process? About 6 minutes. No, 5.5 or so. It was able to migrate 2 hosts completely from VMware, pull them out, shut them down, push them into Proxmox, and crank them on, right? So how would I modify this? One would potentially be the option to do the no disk, where you're just doing stuff from NFS shares. When you're pulling OVFs, you could pull them into an NFS share so that you're not eating up storage on your Proxmox host. That could be another option there. Another one could be connect into the host and grab their network info and check if they are statically configured IPs. If they are, just keep that in memory in a variable. Or, you could extract those files. I mean, you could absolutely do that. Just pull the configuration file, and then whenever you create the network interface again, apply that configuration back on the server so that it does have the exact same static IP. So in the span of, I'm guessing if you were doing this on a single box, it's probably going to run about 3.5 to 4 minutes. Maybe you could completely migrate with exact network information, drive information, all that stuff, and have it crank back up on the other side. So I digress. This is the part where I say thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. I love suggestions on what you folks would love to see next, how you would tweak or tune the existing stuff you're seeing. Just give us feedback. I'm always curious on how I can do this stuff better or different. Also, if you are looking to do some migrations, that's a big part of what we do, professional services here. And so we love to come in, build your Ascender cluster out, have it highly available, maybe help you write some playbooks, maybe help you do migrations entirely. And then we have leave behind of automation, like however you want to do it, we're here to assist. So please reach out. And if nothing else, happy automating. And thanks. And we'll see you next time. Bye.